The controversy at Cambridge involving Harvard University professor Henry Louis Gates begins with two different versions of events, Gates's version and the police version. The question is whether what happened to Gates was motivated by race or just a run-of-the-mill confrontation that got out of hand.
I think that what went wrong personally was that you had two human beings that were reacting to a set of circumstances, and unfortunately at the time cooler heads did not prevail.
What seems clear is that Gates, a 58-year-old man who walks with a cane, had been out of the country on business and returned home here with a chauffeur. The front door was jammed, so he and the driver went round through the back, then returned here to try to force it. A woman in the neighborhood saw what was going on and mistook it for a crime in progress, calling police, reporting two African-American men with backpacks trying to force their way in. By the time police arrived here, Gates was already inside. This is where the stories start to differ just a bit. At the front door, the officer asked Gates for proof that he lived here. He started walking through the house toward the kitchen where his wallet was. The police officer followed him. Gates's lawyer says Gates provided the officer with both his driver's license as well as his university ID. The police report says Gates became belligerent, though he eventually gave the officer his university ID. That officer, who's white, said Gates accused him of being a racist. According to the police report, when the officer asked Gates to step outside, Gates said, "Yeah, I'll speak with your mama outside." Gates's lawyer, Harvard law professor Charles Ogletree, confirms Gates used some strong language.
Professor Gates said, the question here was, why are you doing this? Because I'm a black man and you're a white police officer. Why is this happening to me? I live here.
Gates was arrested and spent several hours in police custody before posting $40 bond on a disorderly conduct charge. He's well known in the neighborhood, and there are a lot of different opinions, some supporting the police.
I'd be glad if somebody called the police if somebody was breaking into my house.
But some blaming the police.
I don't know that it's necessarily typical, but it's certainly something that occurs with too great a greater frequency.
An old debate about race and the police playing out on the academic high ground of one of the nation's top universities.
Joe Johns joins us now. Joe, is it all over? What next?
Well, it's not necessarily all over. Among other things, Gates is considering a documentary on racial profiling. He's also considering his legal options, and we're also told tonight he is demanding an apology from that police officer, so there is still a lot to be said about this case, John.
Joe Johns for us in Cambridge. Joe, thanks. Digging deeper now with a police chief who's also been a powerful advocate of better police community relations. Ronald Davis spent 19 years on the Oakland, California police force. He's now chief of police for the city of East Palo Alto. So you also were the head of the police academy when you were in Oakland. How do you train officers for the sensitivity of operating in the African-American community?
Well, I think you teach them to be sensitive to all communities, but I think you teach them to understand that, that they may be influenced by their biases, make them aware of the stereotypes that they may bring to the job, that the job may teach them. You teach them the value of positive police and community relations and that they're a critical component of their success. And you teach them that professional policing demands ethical policing and that they should be held to a higher standard of actually serving all of our communities.
If I know you don't want to talk specifically about this case, but from the accounts we have received, this appears not to be in doubt, that you had a situation where the professor was deeply offended that he was being questioned on his own property. You have a police officer who believed his professionalism was being questioned by the professor. Is there a way in training that you can put in a circuit breaker, if you will, for when the officer realizes this is getting a bit out of control, I need to somehow, you know, we don't get a pause button in life, but how can you have a circuit breaker? How can you train for that?
Well, I think first you have to make people aware of the impact that their actions may have. Even legal actions, and that's one of the bigger challenges. The legality of the stop is one issue, but the impact of the stop may be another issue. And I think there's a point in time which officers have to realize that their impact, that the ability to detain somebody, to restrict their freedom is pretty powerful, and it should be really used judiciously and respectfully. And so there should be a pause button once facts are determined, once it's clear that there's no threat, there's no crime, and there's really nothing even wrong with apologizing.
We were talking about this in the newsroom today, and on the one hand, you have people who say witnesses walking by a house, see men kicking in the door, they call the police, the officer responding says, I'm responding to a witness report of a break-in. But some African Americans in the office say, wait a minute, you don't understand the sensitivity here that African Americans have in their dealings with the police department, especially in their own neighborhood and, in this case, in their own home. Help us understand that better, sir.
Yeah, I mean, there's two perspectives. One, on one hand, you do want community members to get involved. That is one of the big challenges as a chief. You try to tell community members, hey, make the call if things are suspicious. On the other hand, as an African American, you're always going to have the question, am I suspicious because of my behavior or am I suspicious because of my race? And would that phone call be made if I were not African American? In our history, we cannot deny our history. Our history with police-community relations is not that positive.
And help us understand, where's the distinction? Where do you draw the line between criminal profiling, that is an accepted practice, and racial profiling, which would not be in most cases?
You know, there's a simple phrase we have, John, is that race is a descriptor, not a predictor. When you use race to describe someone that has committed a crime, that's an appropriate use of race. When you use race to predict crime, in other words, the belief that minorities are more likely to commit crime, the belief that if I'm African American, I may not belong in a certain neighborhood. You're trying to predict crime, and that's when you have biases, stereotypes, and disparate outcomes. So race as a descriptor, not a predictor.
Chief, thanks so much for your time and your insights tonight.
Thank you, John.